Picture a busy restaurant. Every table is taken, but across the room, sitting at a table in the corner, is someone who stands out from the crowd. A man with a moustache and his hair swept back. The year is 1937, it's the centre of Madrid, civil war is underway, and he is a reporter. The writer, eating lunch, famously enjoys bullfighting, smoking, drinking, and eating. And the restaurant he's dining at is a place frequented by Republicans and anarchists. What Ernest Hemingway ate and drank that day, no one knows. But what's beyond doubt is his host, the founder of this restaurant called the Parabere, lived a life as extraordinary as Hemingway's. Different, but extraordinary.
Her name was Maria Mestaller Echagüe, and she was from Bilbao. She was a mother of 11 in the 30s in Spain, 1930s. She was also a chef, but she was also an entrepreneur because she had 2 restaurants, one in Bilbao and one in Madrid. And the one in Madrid actually was the favorite restaurant of Ernest Hemingway, war correspondent for the Civil War in Spain, 1936-1939.
And as well as the children, the cooking and the restaurants, Maria Mestaller de Echagüe had a pen name.
The Marquise of Parabere was her writing name, and she wrote the first culinary encyclopedia in Spain that all Spanish chefs have. So very often there is a stereotype, which is not true at all, that there is no female chefs in haute cuisine because it's too demanding, it's too tough. And actually she is the proof that's not real, it's not true. You know, this is a mantra that's not true because she was a mother, she was a wife, she was an entrepreneur, she was a writer. So this lady is a role model. This is why we took the name of Parabere.
Telling the story of Maria Mestaller is journalist Maria Cannibal, who, drawing on the inspiration of this extraordinary woman from a century ago, created an event that celebrates contemporary women working in food, Parabere Forum. Held each year in a different city around the world, the forum brings hundreds of women together, chefs, farmers, producers, writers and more. They gather to share experiences, to learn, and in the spirit of the Marquise, tell inspirational stories. Each edition has a theme aimed at reflecting some of the big issues of our times, which, for most of us right now, feel daunting.
The forum is a global platform. We are 8,000 professional women from 60 different countries, and we promote diversity, inclusion, and gender equality in hospitality.
Each year has a theme. This year's theme was Roots and Roads. Can you explain the thinking and the expectations of how people might use that theme?
We are in a world where there are a lot of hateful ideologies. And food, since ever, has been a tool for war, and many revolutions started because people was starving. So using the food as a weapon of war is not new. And when in Gaza, the United Nations declared last August that it was a famine, we thought it was extremely important to talk about the connections because food is about politics. And I'm always very surprised when there is elections in every country. I never heard the politicians or the future prime minister talk about food. Never. Maybe because it's extremely complex, but they talk a lot about manufacturers, cars, but they never talk about food. And we eat 3 times per day. So food is about politics. And when we see the actual state of the world, we thought it was important to talk about our roots in food, because food is identity, memories, childhood, but roads, because this is the current situation in the world.
In which millions of people are on the move because of conflict, displacement and migration. Over to forum member and moderator of this year's event, food writer Libby Travers.
So we were looking at the importance of wisdom and of history and of tradition, which is where the roots come into it. So we're looking at their role to ground us, but also to nourish us and to hold our memories. So if you imagine a tree, it was that. It was really trying to understand where we come from. And then the roads, which I think is equally important. The roads was about all the influences that have been brought in. So we were looking at the idea of not just roads that we choose, not just roads of adventure or of ambition, but also it could be roads of exile, it could be roads that weren't chosen, roads that we were forced to take, roads of migration.
And so, against the backdrop of war, uncertainty, displacement, and food insecurity, the Forum came together in Barcelona. Over 2 days, inside the magnificent central hall of the city's university, people shared stories, not only of history, hardship and tragedy, but also of food as a source of resilience, of joy and celebration. In this programme, we're going to hear a selection of those stories, each an interpretation of the theme of roots and roads. They'll take us into one of the oldest surviving cultures in the world. We'll follow the survival of a recipe across world wars and 3 generations. We'll step into the Amazon to see how food can help save ecosystems. And we'll hear about missions to save endangered foods in Catalonia and the West Bank. The first story comes all the way from the east coast of Australia, care of an Aboriginal woman cook, restaurateur and writer, Mindy Woods.
Jingala, Jingiwala, Nanyari Mindy, Ni Banjalang Dubay, and Nagali Najagun, Nagali Garma Mala Jogun. Hello, my name is Mindy. I'm a proud Bunjalung woman. Bunjalung country is a beautiful First Nations nation found on the east coast of Australia. We are First Sun people, the most easterly point of Australia. Most famous for Byron Bay, that beautiful coastal town that people love, but of course I love to see it through that cultural lens, that rich, ancient landscape.
Byron Bay is a place where rainforest meets the ocean and a part of Australia with unparalleled biodiversity, which explains why, for 60,000 years, people have devised incredibly diverse and complex food systems there. Through a cookbook and a restaurant, both named after an edible plant called karkalla, Mindy Woods is attempting to bring Aboriginal food culture to the attention of all Australians. As she explained to me after her presentation, it's a campaign to save ancient food roots.
It is a living, breathing food culture that, I guess since colonisation has had some disruptions, but we're finding this incredible revitalisation of our culture and through food. Food's such a powerful way. And karkalla, some people might know it as pig face, a beautiful coastal succulent that grows along the beaches of Bunjalung country, all down the east coast of Australia and even over onto the west coast. The whole plant is edible, and it was the first plant I have memories of picking with my beautiful Nan Muggy Felton when I was a little girl. My Nan taught me that plant belonged there because it knew how to take care of itself, it knew how to take care of others, and it survived there for thousands of years. She would pick it within her hands and crush it, between her fingers and rub it on my skin, teaching me that food was medicine and medicine was our food. And at this time of year, it gets a beautiful, juicy fruit underneath it, which we call our bush lollies, our native lollies. So they're sweet, salty, they almost taste like a salty strawberry. So they're absolutely delicious. And that was my first introduction to native food, which is why I named my restaurant, my book, in my Nan's honour. The food is such an important part of culture. I really believe that food is at the centre of all cultures, and for a very long time, First Nations food culture in Australia has been overlooked.
Overlooked, but it has survived. And this is a food culture based on some of the richest sources of edible biodiversity in the world.
Across Australia, we have 6,500 foods that are unique to Australia. 6,500, which is huge when you think about it. And they're the only ones that have been documented. We know that there's far more as mob, as community. And yet we don't find a fraction of those in our grocery stores, in our marketplace. They're not grown by farmers. We don't have them at our farmers markets. In fact, less than 20 have been approved by the Australian New Zealand food standards for greater human consumption, and only 13 have been identified for commercial viability. I mean, what a loss. You know, some of the most culturally rich foods, some of the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet, and yet we're not using them as a natural resource. So we've got a long way to go.
Indigenous food knowledge all around the world is fragile, as are the ecosystems on which they're based, much of which is down to the history of colonialism. And in Mindy's talk, she explained this had also been the case since the first Europeans settled in Australia 250 years ago.
I mean, it was a very powerful force that happened, you know, through colonisation. Of course, we were dispossessed from our land, but our languages were stopped. We were taken off country, and of course, once you take community off country, you lose access to your sovereign foods. You know, our people had this incredibly nutrient-dense, abundant diet. We were eating up to, 80% of our diet was actually from a plant-based source, and then the rest was supplemented by animal. But when we were colonised, of course, up in my country, we had this big, beautiful, big scrub, the remnant of Gondwana, the original forest of the world. Now, with that big scrub, when colonisation came through, of course, we had these ancient trees, these beautiful ancient trees, some 800 years old, perfect for timber. So the clearing of our land was actually, quite devastating to our people, because most of our native foods that existed within that big, beautiful, big scrub became almost completely decimated. And of course, when we're looking at food security, when we're looking at wellness and health and nutrition in a modern world, I mean, our native foods hold so many of the answers to these questions and these issues and, challenges that we're facing as a global community.
There are examples of Indigenous Australian foods being commercialised around the world. Macadamia nuts and finger limes come to mind. But that process of commercialisation took place without any benefit to the Aboriginal communities connected with those foods. Can Mindy prevent that happening again?
I think there's definitely a growing appetite, and pardon the pun, but a growing appetite for, for First Nations knowledges and the significance that it plays for all of us. I mean, these knowledges, these foods aren't just significant for Aboriginal people, they're actually significant to Australia's cultural identity, and I believe they're significant as a world history, a world story as well. Why it's so important that we're sharing this information and this knowledge out, but making sure that that knowledge and that information is connected and tied to and always belongs to country, community and the cultures where it comes from. We're kind of facing this situation with the growing interest in native food that our First Nations communities are being left out of this industry. There is growing demand for native food, but because we don't have access to land, we haven't had input into the agricultural industry, we're being left behind. And this is an industry based on our knowledge, our culture and our connection to country. And at the moment it's valued at about $100 million Australian dollars, the native food industry, set to go tenfold in the next 5 years, and yet First Nations growers, producers and manufacturers represent 1% of that entire chain. That's a travesty. We've got some amazing examples of protections around food and culture around the world, appellation systems, DOP systems. I would really love to see something similar embedded in Australia to protect our First Nations communities and our foods.
So the mission to educate continues, and through her books and her restaurant, through her teaching, Mindy firmly believes what's really needed is a change in the food system.
I think when we're looking at, a global food security crisis, when we know that a lot of the foods that we're producing through modern agriculture is lacking the nutrients that we actually require, which is why we've got, so much of this pharmaceuticals kind of industry taking control of us at the moment. We've got to get back to the foods of place, the foods of country, the lands from which we live and thrive, and look at those food systems that actually have existed here that don't need herbicides, pesticides or fertilizers to grow. They're drought tolerant, they're salt tolerant. For me, this makes complete sense that we should be investing in a native food system, and yet they're completely overlooked at the moment in our agricultural systems in this country. In fact, things like macadamia are grown more overseas than they are in our own homelands. Finger lime are grown more throughout Europe and in America and Guatemala than they are in Australia. We're completely overlooking the foods that have been here and thrive in our environmental conditions. So for me, it went from cooking these foods to educating my guests and then realising, wow, we need systems change. How do I engage with our community? How do I get more First Nations growers into this space? How do we increase our representation as growers, as knowledge holders, as custodians of the lands? How do we become food manufacturers and actually connect our country, our culture and our knowledge to these foods? Because without us, these are merely ingredients. And of course, when you include First Nations communities in this, there's so much more.
Bundjalung woman Mindy Woods with some of the ideas and stories from her talk. Another presentation which highlighted efforts to protect traditional food routes involved a group of women from Catalonia, and they introduced their story with a short film.
Bon dia, soc la Lluïsa. Hola, bona, soc la Maria Àngel. Soc la Núria Bordó Lledós.
The film shows a sequence of women in their kitchens. Each is in their 70s, and they're talking directly at the camera, describing dishes, ingredients and recipes from their towns and villages in Catalonia.
De la Granadella. De Palamós. Soc una cuinera.
It's all part of a project to document and preserve food knowledge that's disappearing.
M'he convertit en una gastrosàvia. A gastrosàvia. 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 La gastrosàvia.
Gastrosavia is an ambitious project set up to reach a younger generation and hopefully inspire them to start cooking, not only to save traditions, but also improve their health and their finances, all considered to be so important that it's funded by the regional government.
My name is Laura Ruana from the government of Catalonia. The name of the project is Gastrosàvies. It's a combination of two words, two Catalan words, from gastro, from gastronomy, and from sabias, clever people, who also means old woman in Catalan.
And I think when we were hearing the talk, this was also described as wise women. When and why did this begin? What was the problem?
We wanted to put value to this culinary tradition in Catalonia, because we have most of the best restaurants in the world, but this comes from somewhere, from the tradition. It's an evolution, but of the tradition. Without this tradition, this chef, very famous chefs, will not be the ones that they are now. So we wanted to put value to this background and to recover all this knowledge that when this old woman will die, it will be lost if we don't keep them in documents, in videos, in books, etc.
It's true, Catalonia has some of the world's great restaurants and one of Europe's oldest and most delicious food cultures. But it's no different to other parts of the developed world. Social and economic change, along with the homogenization of farming and food, means skills and knowledge are being lost. And so the short films of an older generation passing on recipes to a new one is part of an effort to stop or at least slow down that loss.
El dinar el feien més lleuger, a l'alta d'os, amb una caramanyola del que havia sobrat o bé del que els hi fadaven. I el sopar era...
And the 3-minute films are reaching an audience. Since they were launched a few months ago, some have been viewed hundreds of thousands of times. At the Parabere Forum, I got to meet some of the Gastrosàvia stars, Elena, Marina, Louisa, all from the town of Palamos.
Young people, the cooking is not good.
They don't know how to cook.
A pizza,
They don't eat well and healthy.
And I think you also said that this wasn't just about the cooking and the recipes, it's understanding ingredients and where to get the best quality and the best value and seasonality. So it isn't just about in the kitchen, it's in the market and the shops.
Que no és només la recepta de la cuina, sinó els productes de temporada, el mercat, la tradició.
In our city, in Palamos, we have a market, and we go every day, every day is possible to go to buy to the market. And in our country, we have a fish because Palamos is in the Costa Brava. And we eat many things with fish, not typical paella. It's arroz a la cassola,
which is a local casserole made with pasta noodles.
Why is it so important to save this knowledge and these skills? Why does it matter for the future?
Guardar aquest coneixement, preservar-lo, perquè és important.
És molt important. És molt important, perquè si no la generació...
It's very important because there are diseases,
health problems
linked to the food that you eat.
And also for the economy.
Yeah.
The economy. Because it's not so expensive if you're cooking at home. And it's possible, the same food is possible to cook in the night or to heat with the micro.
Gastro Xavier teacher Louisa on the old school art of batch cooking and a modern method of reheating by microwave. Also following the project is Parabere Forum founder Maria Cannibal.
There is a lot of oral tradition actually. And also because the non-ability to write of some people. And these traditional recipes, in the past, the chef, when they have a recipe, they never, ever share it, And I think it was like a secret ingredients, secret quantities. And actually the only way to don't lose any kind of knowledge, not only the recipes, is to share it. Otherwise it will be lost. And so there are all these ancestral recipes that there is nothing written, this an oral transmission from women to women. Now they have written all of them, they have record videos, and it's the way to preserve in a very globalized world, to preserve this knowledge for future generations. But it's extremely interesting to see that this ancestral history now is recorded for future generations. The same way we have seeds banks, now we have recipe banks.
From Catalonia, we moved to the West Bank at a presentation at the Forum which brought to life a story which in recent months has been making news with increasing regularity.
Brahim's family have farmed olives here for generations. This week, he said, his trees were hacked to pieces by settlers who've set up camp on a nearby hill. As we stood there, masked settlers carrying sticks charged down the hill and across the field towards us. A completely unprovoked attack.
We have to go, Fred.
The BBC's Lucy Williamson reporting last year on a rise in settler violence on farmland around Nablus. The focus of much of this coverage is, understandably, about attacks on land and people. But a speaker at the Forum described how these events can also be seen as an attack on identity and culture.
Good morning, and thank you for Maria for inviting me, and thank you for all of you. You are here. My name is Fidaa. I think everything is started in 1982.
In her presentation, Palestinian food writer Fidaa Abuhamdiya explained that when olive trees are burnt down or farmers forced away from their groves, so ends access to oil and food routes with thousands of years of history.
We see how when in the West Bank, the settlers are burning the olive trees, and we see how they cut them, and we see how many farmers couldn't arrive to their lands to collect their olives and make their olive oil. So many of Palestinian recipes lost the taste of olive oil this year in the kitchen, in the houses of Palestinians, because they couldn't go and collect their olives, and they don't have money to buy the olive oil, so they used seeds oil.
With so much going on in the Middle East, a story of people being unable to access olive oil and having to turn to seed oil instead might seem trivial. But it isn't, argues Fidaa. The breaking of a deep connection to land and food matters, she says.
It's important because many or most of Palestinian food recipes are based on olive oil, because the oil that we always had, and because they are fighting us with our ingredients, one of the most important ingredients in terms also psychological terms, because a farmer or an old man who used to 70 years old, who used to every year to wait the season and go. And I'm not saying that it's a romantic time, the time of olive oil, because it's hard work and you have to work a lot. But people wait for this season. Many people cannot afford the price of the olive oil because it's it arrives also to $20 or $18, $15 for 1 liter. So it's people cannot afford that. People change the olive oil to the other oil.
To seed oils, yeah.
Yeah.
And so what was every day is now a real luxury.
It's a luxury.
And what was part of the culture is now becoming a rarity.
This has now escalated into open confrontation between settlers and local Palestinians, with more people coming to join the fight on either side. Locals say this is happening almost every day now, and these are the tactics settlers are using to take the land, field by field.
Maria Cannibal.
I was very touched by Fidaa, actually, when she said that now in Palestine they don't have olive oil, they have seeds oil, and that this is making a big...
You're still moved by that story, yeah. Take your time, Maria.
Sorry, because I in my house 1 liter of olive oil is 15 days. We drink it,
yeah.
And it's like it's really a punishment to give you seed oil for these people. So it's traumatic. I'm not Palestinian, and look at me, so I can imagine for them. So there is a lot of ways to punish people, a lot. And it's not only hunger, it's also privating you of your identity and your taste, which is olive oil.
From violence in the West Bank to another of Parabere's presentations, which also talked of conflict, this time in the Amazon.
Yo en la casa tengo medicina tradicional. Lo trabajo con varios abuelos de 7 grupos étnicos.
Lilia Menezes Trujillo is an indigenous woman from a Guainano community in the Colombian Amazon. For as long as she can remember, her home, her community, and the forest around them were dominated by the decades-long conflict involving guerrilla groups such as FARC, the government, and paramilitary forces. Indigenous land became a base for fighters and a site for coca labs and drug production. After the peace agreement in 2016, Lilia and her community regained access to their land, and by creating a farm, a restaurant and a school, an ecosystem is being restored. Maria Cannibal explains.
In this part, in the Guavira, in this part, it was a very, it was a war, actually, with the FARC, so it was a very, very, very high part of, let's say, the conflict. Like they say in Colombia, they don't say the war, they say the conflict. So when they start the peace agreements, the idea was to give back the land to the farmers, because in the past it was drug and arms and the FARC, So the indigenous people, now they are allowed to cultivate their own land, ancestral land, is their territory. And so she created this cooperative with different ladies. She created a culinary festival. They are cooking traditional cuisine, ancestral methods, and it's a way to empower and to be proud of her roots, which was also the theme of this year.
mi cigarrillo antes de yo irme. Tengo mis...
As well as being a speaker at the forum, Lilia is also an award winner. In recognition of her work reviving a culture and preserving ancestral traditions, she was also awarded a grant to attend the forum in Barcelona so she could tell her story. Travelling with her was restaurateur Karina Soto, who'd made it into the Amazon last year to see Lilia's project in action.
So one thing to put in context is, as a Colombian myself, I did not know anything about Amazonian gastronomy. And it's really sad. We went through periods where we were not able to really travel in the country. Now a lot of things have changed. A lot of armed groups gave back their guns, and there were territories that were recuperated for the people, for the locals. I think gastronomy, giving visibility and voice to the locals and to the communities, is a way to empower them, to earn money, to to show what Colombia is also about, and so many ethnic groups and so many languages are still alive. We need to give them more visibility, more empowerment, and they need money to live, like all of us. So this type of offerings, the gastronomy offer, is definitely the most sustainable one, and definitely making sure that these communities are actually getting paid and they're getting a decent living. There's no other way.
Karina Soto on using food to restore a part of the Amazon and an indigenous food culture. Our last story also features a war, and unfortunately one that shows no sign of ending soon. It's Ukraine's, and the speaker was the cook and writer Olia Hercules.
When Maria sent me the topic for this year's forum, Roots and Roads, I nearly fell off my chair. I'd just written my family memoir called Strong Roots. The memoir spans 100 years of my family history, and I was hoping to tell a Ukrainian story through the lens of a family. Because we see the war and we see the headlines and we see news from this almost kind of like a bit of a non-personal gaze, and I really wanted people to learn our personal stories and to really feel us and to understand us and hopefully to keep supporting us. It's where we are now in the 4th year of this terrible war. When I think of roots that are ancestors deep in the black soil, and I think of the young leaves of my children. I have 2 boys, one is 14, Sasha, and one is 6, Wilfred. And rootedness is safety, it's stability, right? It's been rooted in to a place where you feel safe, you have a home, you have your garden. To Ukrainians, gardens are incredibly important, and hence, when I think of roots, I think of food. I think of literal edible roots. Of course, I think of beetroot. That's the first, probably, image that comes into my head. And then we move to roads. And to be honest with you, the first association, the first thing that I feel when I hear roads is actually displacement and exile. The other day I realized that not one of my generation of my families has escaped dispossession, so losing your home and everything that you own, deportation or war. Not one generation. And my parents and my extended family are going through that again.
On stage, Olia told a story that explored 100 years of her family's roots, and also the roads she and previous generations had taken, sometimes through choice, more often because of displacement. Weaving through her story was food, and there are recipes that Olia cooks today and which feature in her cookbooks that have survived against all odds. In fact, when you hear her family story, it seems miraculous that they have survived. Take a borscht recipe she inherited from her maternal grandmother, Lucia, who was born in 1921 during one of the many famines instigated by the Soviet regime.
She was a daughter of Moisei Beschasny, who was a wheat farmer and who also had watermelon fields. So in the south of Ukraine, we are the land of watermelons.
Under Stalin, Lucia's family land was taken away, and as a child, along with her 5 siblings, she was forced onto a train and deported.
And they were taken all the way to the Finnish border in Vologda and thrown in the middle of the night out of the train into a forest in the middle of nowhere. She was a great storyteller, and this is the part of the story that almost feels like some kind of a fairy, gothic fairy tale, where they go down all the women go down on the snow and start praying. And the younger boys and the older men go out into this wilderness to look for help. And luckily they did find a very isolated church of Russian old believers, and they saved them.
Lucia went on to survive Nazi occupation and brought up a family. Her husband, Olia's grandfather, not only fought in the war, but was also sent to a gulag for the crime of removing a patch of grass to feed a cow. Lucia endured all of this, and in the 1980s it was at her home that Olia and the rest of the family gathered to cook, to eat and talk.
And everybody would sit down. I still remember, I can still picture it. But the table is groaning with food, most of it from ingredients that has been grown in the garden, in the allotment. And my family would share stories. Literally, everybody would just tell a story and start crying, like men, women, whatever. And now I realize that it was a kind of a therapy, almost, like a family therapy, sitting around the table, letting those emotions out and having that little bit of, or loads of food and a little bit of drink, having your children running around. And I can imagine that it was a really healing thing for them.
It's at these gatherings that Olia learnt about her family history and also family recipes, including Lucia's borscht, which, after the forum and back in the UK, she cooked for me.
So it has chicken and beetroot and red peppers, which is a very South Ukrainian thing, beans, carrots, onions. It's full of vegetables. As you can see, it's a broth, but as my grandmother used to say, it needs to be so full of vegetables that when you stick a spoon inside, it should not fall down.
And it does that. It is. And the colour,
I passed the test.
Yeah, the colours are wonderful.
Yeah. My parents, when they fled the south of Ukraine, which is still occupied by the Russian forces, when my parents escaped, they went to Italy to stay at my cousin's place. And I arrived 6 hours before them because I didn't want them to come into this cold, empty house. I wanted to cook them borscht for them to smell the, smells of home and to hear this kind of bubbling and to see the condensation on the windows. And then, it made it so much easier for us to talk about all the difficult things. What do roots mean to us? It can be an abstract thing, it can be a metaphysical thing, it can be roots in terms of our connection to our ancestors, but it's also about food, and for Ukrainians, all of those roots are entangled in the most kind of natural way, in the most organic way. So my grandmother Lucia, who I don't think that my mom or I would have been the cooks that we are without her and without her influence. She taught my mom how to make this borscht that I'm cooking for you today when my mom was 7 years old. And then my mom taught me, and today I'm making it for you. And of course, it's full of root vegetables as well. There's a beetroot and carrots and potatoes. And it's a life-giving thing, borscht. It connects us to our roots and it gives us strength. As my mom says, borscht is part of our DNA.
It's so hearty.
It's good, isn't it?
Really full of flavour. Soul food.
And I joke sometimes. I say, in Asian countries, people say, "Oh, have you eaten rice today?" to say hello. And I joke that in Ukraine we would say something like, "Have you eaten borscht this week?" At least for us in my family, we ate it all the time, and it becomes better after each day.
If borscht is in Olia's DNA, so is the need to bring people together over food, just as Lucia did.
It was extremely important for her that everyone was together as well, because of everything that she's been through and because of the way that she survived. She also had all of these siblings. she knew the value and importance of getting together. And how do you get that family close? How do you keep those siblings close? By getting together, by talking and by eating. And all of that together, it almost has a healing power, I believe.
In her talk on Roots and Roads and in her memoir, Food Looms Large, there are plenty of references to borscht and other dishes. And perhaps because of that, it adds insights you rarely get from news stories. That what has been and is still unfolding are millions of personal human tragedies, along with millions of individual acts of resilience.
I really wanted to explain to people that the war didn't start 4 years ago. The war didn't start 10 years ago. We have been in this kind of war for centuries, really, Ukrainians. And still, despite all of these movements, whether it was voluntary immigration, like me coming to the UK, or whether it was a forced displacement, despite all of that, we have managed to preserve this knowledge, of food, of traditions, the importance of storytelling. I think that's why I became a writer and a chef. I mean, literally what I was, describing to you before with my extended family, that feeling that I must have received from those kind of sessions, family sessions being together, that's what I try to replicate now in my job. The feeling of satisfaction of seeing someone eat, like today, watching you eat borscht, I'm like getting dopamine levels like nothing else, There's so much in it. It's important, and I'm so happy that my children are into it as well. Like Sasha can make a really good borscht. He's only 14.
Olia Hercules ending our collection of food stories on the theme of roots and roads.